Welcome to the Lightbulb Moment podcast. You are listening to one of our foundation episodes where we explore the basic terms and concepts of virtual classrooms. We will refer back to these foundation episodes in our future podcasts. To listen to our regular format, just skip to episode 4. You can find out more at Lightbulbmoment.online. Welcome to the Lightbulb Moment podcast. You are listening to Foundation Episode 3, Virtual Classroom Tools and Applications. You're here with Mike, I'm your host, and I'm also joined by virtual classroom expert Joe. So, Joe, talk us through some of the main tools and what are we talking about when we say tools in a virtual classroom?
Well, when I say tools, I would mean things like green tick and polling and chat window. But I wonder if you actually mean platforms like Adobe Connect and WebEx.
Well, I guess this is the question. where do we actually want to start? Should we start let's start with platforms then. Okay, so what are some of the common platforms? What is a platform? How do they work?
So when you connect for a virtual classroom, you need to have some kind of software to connect you together. And that is what we usually call a platform, or it could be the program or the service. So I use the term platform. So examples that people may have heard of and used are Adobe Connect, WebEx Meeting Center, WebEx Training Center, GoToMeeting, GoToTraining, Skype for Business, Saba Classroom, Zoom, and about a million others that are out there as well.
Okay, and this is when we actually say virtual classroom, this is effectively the software, the platform is what hosts that virtual classroom, which then attendees join and the facilitator teaches in.
Yeah, exactly. And different ones work in all sorts of different ways. They use different underlying technology, a bit like with a car, is it a diesel or a petrol? They do different things. Have you got a sports car or an SUV or a people carrier or a lorry? And also some of them are easier to use. Is it an automatic or do you have a stick shift or a gear? So all of those things are different in those platforms.
Okay, and then, so when we started, you were saying green ticks, raise hands, things like this. So is that then, those are then what you would then class as the separate tools which can be different or similar in these platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. So green tick, or for our American friends, they would say green check mark or green check. They're different ways of being able to interact and be able to communicate with each other. So just like if you use messaging or WhatsApp, you can send a smiley face or something like that. It's a different way of communicating, and each platform has their own way of doing it.
And so these basic ones, you've just said the green tick, the red cross. Just give us, I mean, a lot of people, they might sit there and think, well, that's obvious, but this is a foundation episode. Just explain to us why you would have that and why most of these platforms do have that kind of service.
Because it's all about the interaction. So when you're doing anything other than broadcast, so if you listen to a radio show or a podcast, you don't have those kind of buttons because it's not about interacting with people. It's about consuming. With the virtual classroom, the key is interaction, it's engagement, it's being involved. And that means doing activities together, having discussions and so on. So therefore you need a mechanism or a tool to be able to do that. So things like a chat window, a text window where you can type information for other people to see, or a green tick or check to say, yes, I agree, or a red X or a red cross to say, no, I disagree, are some of those ways that you can communicate amongst all the people in your virtual classroom platform.
So this is the equivalent of everyone nod your heads if you agree, shake your heads if you don't agree in the face-to-face environment.
Exactly.
And so this then brings in the fact that you can have a status check on where everyone is or some of the people are. You've just delivered, you've just done a slide which gives some technical information. And then you would say to people, well, basically, do you understand this? Do you agree with it? And then you can judge the response from the class.
Yeah, exactly that. So in Foundation episode 2, we just introduced that idea of digital body language and also about deconstructing what we do in a face-to-face environment and then rebuilding that online. So I can't look around in my virtual classroom and see people nodding. So therefore, you're absolutely right. I have to ask for a green tick or a red X. Does that give me the same nuance as everybody's individual expression? No, of course not. Does it give me a starter for 10 to move on with? Absolutely. And it's about how I deal with that technology and those tools after that to make me a great facilitator.
And yeah, going back to that Foundation episode 2, where we were saying about the facilitators still have their skill sets, it's just updating it. I guess this would be, maybe that might be a passive thing that the facilitator in a face-to-face classroom would just naturally be looking at faces and picking this up. It's actually something that you still do the same thing, you just need to stop and actually sort of insert that mechanism into the virtual classroom. You actually need to say, I'm stopping you all now. Do you agree with this point? Rather than sitting there and going, oh, I can see everyone smiling and nodding. They obviously understand.
Yeah. And it sounds a little bit brutal, the way you explain it, which is really good explanation for understanding, but that can sound really brutal. But actually, when you get in the flow of it, it's actually really natural and you can do it all the time. And it's really interactive and people love it. So as brutal as it sounds right now, once you get in the flow, it's lovely.
Yeah, I did kind of explain it as like a big red hand saying, halt, everyone stop. But yeah,
halt your learning now.
Exactly. But it's more of a, you've just delivered something that's like, and it will just flow. I've seen you just flow. It just goes, oh, give me a green check if you agree. And then all of a sudden somebody puts a red cross and you go, oh, well, Jane, why don't you agree with this? Or do you not understand it? And it flows naturally. And I think also with these tools is the fact that when you actually explain them and once people start using them a few times, they quickly become, trained and understand that as soon as you say that, and they're probably already, before you've even finished your sentence, already sitting there going, oh, okay, yep, green check, I've got this.
Yeah. And actually, people do that. Different groups behave differently online, just like they do in a face-to-face classroom. And some sessions where, you're just explaining something or delivering something or somebody else is saying something or you're reading it out from the chat, and people are spontaneously putting green ticks or smiley faces or round of applause, depending upon the platform, because they're liking it and they're agreeing with it. So they're giving you their nod of their head. And that's really awesome because that's where you get that kind of not quite, but almost equivalent body language and that interactivity. And that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I have to admit, when I first sort of were producing on some of these sessions, so it's kind of like a DJ producer, I guess, sort of helping around the background whilst you were facilitating virtual classrooms. That's something that really struck me was when you didn't even have to ask. Or people, another attendee would come up on the microphone, say something, and people would all be green ticking, or some people would be red crossing, saying, "No, actually, I don't agree with what my colleague has just said," or I do agree with what they've just said. So let's focus on. So we've just covered, because that's obviously one of the basic ones. Basically a positive affirmation or a negative point of I'm not following you. And that is you simply click a button and it is displayed next to your name so that either the host or everyone in the class can actually see whether you agree or disagree.
Yeah, pretty much. So usually what you have, and we're focusing on virtual classroom here, not webinars. Webinars are a slightly different thing, although some of this can be applied. So focusing on the virtual classroom, 9 times out of 10 in most software, you will have a list of the people attending. So an attendees list. So you'll see Bob, Alice and Eve have logged in and you've got Joe is the host and maybe Mike is the producer. And you'll see that list of names. And that's a really useful thing, which I'll come back to in terms of my body language and speaking to people and visualizing them. But what that usually means then is when you say green tick if you agree with me and people go and find that green tick and click on it, those green ticks or check marks usually will show up next to people's names. So we can see Bob and Alice have both put a green check, and Eva's put a red X to say a version of no. And then that's where you see that in that attendees panel.
And so then what other tools do we have available? And is that tool we've just spoken about, the green check or the red cross or its equivalent, is that universal in most of these different platforms that we mentioned at the start?
It's in most of them when you're speaking about virtual classrooms, but as with all technology, you can use them in different ways. So for instance, WebEx or Cisco WebEx software, they have Event Center, Meeting Center, Training Center as 3 different types of license, if you like. Now, Meeting Center, a lot of people use because it's available in their organization for video conferencing and meetings and so on, as per the name. But that hasn't got the green tick and the red X in it. It's only got a hand up icon. And there's even limitations on how I, as a host, can actually use that. Whereas WebEx Training Center, because it's designed for the virtual classroom, it has the tick and a cross. And it's actually got other things in. It's got various smileys. It's got a coffee cup to say I'm away from my computer, and other things as well. So it depends very much on the platform you're using. So if you're using the version for training, like GoToTraining is different from GoToWebinar. The functionality is different. And that's why I'm saying that what we're talking about here is virtual classroom platforms. So usually it will have the tick check mark and the cross. But if you're using a different platform for it, then you might have to use things in a different way and be a bit more creative.
So that might be one of the things for, as a listener, in your organization, or if you're thinking about starting virtual classrooms, is actually see what you have available and actually working out those differences. And so in your experience, most of the ones which is for training will actually have some kind of training in the, what is it you said, you got WebEx Training Center, GoToTraining.
So the name isn't the main thing. I mean, that's an indicator. But with Adobe Connect, for instance, the licenses will depend on the number of users. It's not so much about the functionality. With Zoom, there's a Zoom webinar version which gives you different functionality to the meeting stuff, but it's not in the name per se. So you can't just rely on that. You have to actually look at what are the features available to me. But you make a great point about what's available. So people often ask me, what is the best virtual classroom platform? And there isn't a best one. There's stuff I love about this one and stuff I love about that one. But the best one is the one that you've already got, because they're not necessarily cheap things, especially at enterprise level when you're wanting numbers of licenses and all sorts of other things. So whilst some of them might not be my favorite to work in because of the functionality or the way that they do things, if that's what you've got, great, go with it. And whilst it's not the main point of our discussion today in this foundation episode, the way you design your session according to the technology you've got will be different. So if you're using WebEx Meeting Center, there's no green tick, there's no red X, there's no smiley face. I can't control the hand up. I have to get you to control it, and a myriad of other things I don't have. I just have to make sure that in my design and my delivery, I take that into account. But that's pretty much the same as it would be face-to-face. I've done a couple of face-to-face sessions recently where I've gone in and I've had the expectation of how the tables are set up. Are there flip charts? Will people have pen and paper? Is there an internet connection that's reliable? But if I get there and for some reason the internet's down, or there's only 2 flip charts instead of 4 that I was told there's going to be, I have to adapt and go with that. And this is just a technical equivalent.
I really like that analogy that you've used there, bringing it into a face-to-face classroom, and you've got to go with what you've got available. You know, flat projector isn't working, you don't use it.
And we've all had those issues.
Yes. Oh yes.
The acetate melting, the OHP lamp bar bursts, all sorts of things.
And you've alluded to, because we will definitely have future podcast episodes where we will go over design and how you'll bring that together. But the point, I guess, is understanding what the tool you have available can do. And we're talking...
And it's what it can do and its limitations, so that you know when there's a problem. So I worked with a client a while ago and they said, oh, well, we don't like virtual classrooms or webinars because they can't do what we want to do in our, whatever it was, management training or something. And I said, well, okay, what is it that you do there that you can't do online? And they said, well, usually we get people in pairs or threes or whatever it is, and they coach each other on blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, why can't you do that? And they said, well, we don't have a way to do that. And they were using WebEx Meeting Center, which doesn't have any version of breakout room. And the breakout room is just a version of saying, right, you guys go off to the cafeteria, you guys go off to meeting room 7 and have your conversation and make your notes and come back to the classroom later. It's a technical equivalent of that. So if they'd had WebEx Training Center with that functionality, they wouldn't be saying to me, well, these are no good because we can't do the same as face-to-face. So that's actually a really important point.
Yeah, well said. And I think this leads us on to, so, we've mentioned the green checks. You've just highlighted briefly what a breakout room is, or breaking people up. They can have private conversations, the equivalent of you go work with your partner next to you, you three in that corner, work together, come back to us. So then what are some of the other things? You mentioned raise hand earlier. How does that work? How is that utilized in virtual classrooms?
And it's really interesting. I try not to say raise hand. So we're saying RAISE, as in put your hand up. But I've had instances where I'm saying, click on raise hand. And they're going, well, where's the hand of Ray? Where's Ray and his hand? I was like, no, it's not a person called Ray who's got a hand. So I try and call it the hand up icon for that reason. It's a really silly, minor thing. But, this is the thing when you're trying to explain things, is people hear it in their own way. So the hand up icon is what it says on the tin. There's a picture of a button. If you press that button, a picture of a hand in the air will show, usually next to your name on the screen.
So as similar to like if you did a green check with your equivalent of nodding, or a red cross of no, I don't agree. This effectively is a similar thing, but rather than that green tick, it's then a raised hand icon alerting the facilitator. Is this?
Yeah. So some software like Adobe Connect will actually come up with a little notification saying Bob has clicked his hand up. Other software it doesn't, but I then need to make sure I pay attention to that attendee panel so that I can see that there's a hand up icon next to Bob's name. And you can use that in different ways. So usually the way I use that in my sessions is almost like you're at school and it's please miss, can I say something? So basically it's I have a question or comment and I would like to speak. And I see that and I always say to people, great, I promise you I'll see it. And then at an appropriate point, it could be 30 seconds or 3 minutes later, I'll say, hey, Bob, please unmute. What was your question or comment? And then they can speak. And that's really important, but you can also use that hand up icon in different ways. So it could just be, hands up if you've all had the experience where blah, blah, blah. Or hands up for who would like to go first, because some systems will give you the number of who put their hand up first, or will put them in order. And again, going back to perhaps you've got WebEx Meeting Center and you've only got a hand up. Well, actually, your hand up has to be used for everything. So hand up if you agree with this, or hand up if you want to go and do such and such. But it's a really great way of basically waving your arm in the air to get attention.
And I like how you mentioned in the previous podcast about the digital body language. And I like the idea of this software, which has got more of these things that as a facilitator, you can instantly see, say you're going through something and then a load of people give you the green tick. You're like, oh, okay, they're kind of nodding, they're agreeing. But then all of a sudden somebody raises their hand, instantly, because you've also got that green tick process. If they raise a hand, it means something different. It means that they actually want to communicate and to actually open up their microphone, or for you to allow them to actually then get their actual voice into the virtual classroom.
Yeah, and you pick up on another great tool. So if people have been on webinars, especially public, maybe broadcast, sales, marketing webinars, 99 times out of 100, what you will have is maybe a host, maybe a speaker doing all of the talking. You may or may not have a chat window. And with a virtual classroom, that's different. And whilst there will be instances where it doesn't work and you have to cope with it, what you want is people to talk. So whether that's through voice over IP or VoIP through the computer with a headset and microphone, or whether that's through telephony and you actually dial in a telephone number, doesn't matter. The point is you want to be able to say, Bob, what do you think? Can you tell me more? Or Alice puts her hand up to verbally ask a question. And that could be, I am in control of muting and unmuting them, whether it's telephone or microphone. It could be they're in control of it. And that will depend on all sorts of things about your software, how comfortable you are. Early in my career, I definitely kept control over that. And now in my career, I'm just like, yeah, anybody can unmute anytime, whatever, we'll cope with it. It'll be fine. So there's variations you can do there too.
And you mentioned in the previous podcast, whiteboards. So just give us a rundown. How does a whiteboard work? Why would you use it? And what is the benefit from using it?
So in a lot of face-to-face sessions, what people end up doing is either as the facilitator, you write on a whiteboard yourself or a flip chart, and or you might give flip chart paper to people for activities. So then you can stick it up on the wall or everybody can see the writing, something like that. And what the whiteboard functionality does is give you your virtual classroom equivalent. And you can use it in all sorts of different ways. So getting a tiny bit technical just for a moment, just a tiny bit, Mike, don't worry.
I'll let it happen. I'll let it happen this time.
What you can have is, and again, this isn't always the case, but often you upload your slides and then you have your annotation tool. So basically a pen tool, a square tool, think really basic paint stuff from 1998. And you can use that to draw on top of your slides. You're not ruining your slides or anything like that. Don't worry. I use that loads because you can't see me pointing, you can't see me gesturing. And I use it loads to underline a point that I'm making or to do a really bad drawing of something to highlight what we're talking about. So this can kind of
be like a laser pen, effectively using your laser pen on the whiteboard.
And actually, some of the annotation tools have a laser pen option. I must admit, I don't use it very often, but other people do really well. So there's that way of, that's almost the equivalent of me doing my flip chart or my whiteboard. But also then what we can do is we can get our attendees and our learners involved in this. So it could be either a slide that I've designed in my PowerPoint deck, and it could be in rows, like rows in a table. So I've got 8 attendees, I've got 8 rows in my table. They've all got their own row to go and type text into. Or it could be I've got 4 different coloured boxes for them to go and put whatever information in those boxes that's appropriate for my activity, and about a million other ideas. And then they go and do the activity on the slide. There's a technically very slightly different thing, which is the actual whiteboard, where you load up basically a blank piece of paper or a blank screen and people do the same thing. But they're so similar that actually, whether it's on a slide or on a technical whiteboard, basically the concept is you can contribute together and collaborate in your virtual classroom session with pen tools, colours, squares, drawing kind of tools, as well as text tools, so that you can make it really fun and interactive and colourful and organic. It's so much fun.
And then that's going to be bringing people's personality across. You're getting a wealth of information about what they think, brainstorming different ideas. So that's kind of the key aspect. Whiteboard, I guess, can be used in a whole multitude of different activities and things you want to do.
It's probably one of my favourite tools and way of designing activities for the virtual classroom.
That is great. And it's the fact that I guess it's everyone or limited amount of people, whoever it is, all jumping in together and sharing their experience. So off the top of your head, maybe just run through, are there some more tools that you really want to highlight? We won't have time to go into all of them. What are some of the more main tools?
So the other really main one that we haven't talked about is the chat panel. I've mentioned it a few times. So this is where people type their text. It's imperative because aside from anything else, you want to be able to type in there, welcome to my session on X, so people know they're in the right place. If they can't get their audio working, for instance, and can't hear you, you need to be able to give them a way of saying, try clicking this or this to get it working. But it's also a great tool for learning and communication, and we'll talk more about it in another podcast. And then you get into things like polls and more about breakout rooms and video and webcam, but they're all for another day.
And we will cover all of those, and I'm sure loads more in our future podcast episodes. This was the last Foundation episode. So going on from the next episode, we're going to be doing our sort of more normal format with a topic, some skills, some different things, a discussion, and we'll see how it goes from there. So thank you so much today, Jo, and I look forward to the next podcast.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for listening. We really hope you enjoyed it and look forward to your feedback and your comments. If you like the podcast, please remember to subscribe and to share. You can follow Mike on Twitter @MikeLightbulb. You can follow me on Twitter @LightbulbJo, and for other updates @MomentLightbulb. You can also find our podcasts on YouTube, along with more great content. If you're in need of virtual classroom training, check out Lightbulbmoment.online. For our blogs, Lightbulbmoment.info. And remember our free community for questions and resources, Lightbulbmoment.community.